The most dangerous thing a woman can do in a room full of powerful men is make them forget she's there. Audrey Sims had spent 11 years perfecting that disappearing act. At 31, she was the kind of woman people catalogued in a single glance and immediately filed away. Medium height, soft everywhere, round face framed by unremarkable brown hair. She kept pinned back because loose hair felt like a liability in the places she worked. She dressed in navy and charcoal, and the occasional muted burgundy, colors that belonged to furniture rather than people. She moved quietly through rooms the way background noise moves, present, necessary, and entirely unregistered. She was a bookkeeper, had been since she was 20, first for a mid-size accounting firm in Cleveland, then for a string of restaurants and hospitality groups in Chicago after she followed a boyfriend here and stayed long after he left. Now she kept the books for Meridian Group, a private equity holding company with a gleaming penthouse office on Michigan Avenue and a portfolio of restaurants, logistics firms, and real estate. Ventures that, if you knew how to read the numbers the right way, formed a very particular kind of constellation. Audrey knew how to read numbers the right way. She'd known for about 3 years, which was roughly how long she'd been telling herself it wasn't her business. The man whose business it actually was had a name that every serious person in Chicago already knew: Stellan Cade. He was 42 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from peace, but from absolute certainty that he was the most dangerous thing in any room he occupied. His hair had gone silver at the temples in the past year, which somehow made him look less like a man aging and more like a storm front moving in. He ran Meridian Group from the 43rd floor and, below that, ran a network of operations that bore no official name and appeared on no organizational chart that Audrey was authorized to access. She was not authorized to access a lot of things. She had accessed them anyway, because Audrey Sims had a gift she had never once advertised. She saw patterns the way other people heard music, naturally, involuntarily, constantly. The numbers told her stories, and the stories, lately, had been keeping her up at night. She had never spoken to Stellan Cade directly. Executives like him didn't speak to bookkeepers. She sent her reports to his CFO, a crisp man named Warren, who forwarded them upward after removing her name from the header. She was infrastructure. She was the waterline in the walls. Essential, invisible, and easily forgotten until something went catastrophically wrong. She was completely fine with that arrangement. Or she had been, until the Thursday in March, when she was in the 43rd floor conference room at 7:15 in the morning, restocking the printer with fresh paper, because the office manager was out sick, and someone had to do it, and she heard 2 men talking in the adjacent boardroom through the thin gap in the connecting door. She recognized one voice immediately: Stellan Cade's CFO, Warren. The other voice she didn't recognize, but the words came through with terrible clarity. The wire clears Friday. That gives you the weekend before he starts asking questions about the Q1 figures. His own bookkeeper won't flag it. She only sees the subsidiary ledgers. By the time anyone traces it back, the account is already dissolved and the holding company in Cyprus has changed hands. A pause. Then Warren, quiet and precise, and the quarterly audit, handled. Cade's going to be looking at clean books right up until the moment he isn't. Audrey stood completely still next to the printer, a ream of paper held against her chest, her heart beating so loudly she was surprised they couldn't hear it through the wall. She knew exactly which Cyprus account they were talking about. She'd thought the shell structure was anomalous for 18 months. She'd documented it 3 times in internal memos that Warren had quietly archived without response. She'd assumed she was wrong, or that she didn't understand the full picture. She had not been wrong. She had not been missing the full picture. Warren had been receiving her warnings and using them as a map. Someone was siphoning money from Meridian Group, not from the outer subsidiaries, from the core, and the CFO was the architect, and they were moving on Friday. Audrey set the paper down on the cabinet as softly as she could, backed out of the room, and returned to her desk on the 39th floor with the careful, unhurried gait of a woman who had heard absolutely nothing. She sat at her keyboard and stared at her screen for a long time. The rational part of her brain, the part that had gotten her through an accounting degree at a state school on a near-empty scholarship, and 11 years in an industry that treated her like furniture. That part told her to call the FBI's financial crimes tip line, give them what she had, and spend the next 6 months being very invisible in a very different city. But she kept thinking about something else. She kept thinking about the Friday before Christmas 2 years ago, when the pipes burst in the ceiling of the 39th floor, and water came pouring down into the back office where 3 junior staff had been working late. Stellan Cade had been in the building for a late meeting. He had come down himself, sleeves rolled up, helped carry equipment out of the water's path, while his security team called the contractors. He hadn't needed to do that. He had done it anyway. She thought about the Christmas envelopes distributed to all staff, including the contract workers, including the bookkeeper, who was officially employed through a third-party firm and whose name appeared on no internal directory. There had been an envelope with her name on it. Inside was a handwritten note, not his handwriting, probably his assistant's, that said simply, "Your work does not go unnoticed," and a check that covered her rent for 3 months. She had cried about it in her car. Quietly, the way she did everything. Stellan Cade was not a good man. She had known that for as long as she had worked here. She was not naive about what Meridian Group was. Not really. Not after 3 years of reading the real numbers. But he was not the kind of man who deserved to be gutted from the inside by someone he trusted. Nobody deserved that. Audrey opened a blank document and started typing. She wrote everything she knew, precisely, and without embellishment. The Cyprus account, the 18 months of anomalies, the specific transfer structure she'd identified, the account numbers she'd cross-referenced from the subsidiary ledgers. She wasn't supposed to be cross-referencing, the timeline implied by what she'd overheard that morning, and Warren's name spelled out clearly at the top. Then she printed it. She folded it twice, tucked it into the inner pocket of her cardigan, and spent the rest of the morning doing her actual job with mechanical precision, while she figured out how to get this into Stellan Cade's hands before Friday, without going through a single person whose loyalty she could not personally verify. The problem was that she had never been in the same room as Stellan Cade. She had certainly never been alone with him. His calendar was managed by an assistant named Petra. Audrey had glimpsed her name on routing emails, and his physical access was controlled by a security detail that treated the 43rd floor like an airlock. You didn't just walk up to the man. She went to lunch at 12:30, which she always did, which meant she was reliably invisible for exactly 45 minutes. She bought a coffee she didn't drink and sat in the lobby atrium of the building next door and thought. She knew 2 things about Stellan Cade's schedule from 3 years of observing the patterns of this building, the way she observed everything else. He arrived before 7, and on the first Thursday of every month, he used the building's private side exit on Huron Street at precisely 6:45 in the evening to get into a car that took him somewhere his public calendar did not reflect. Today was the first Thursday of March. Audrey went back to her desk. She worked until 6:30. She shut down her computer, tucked the folded document deeper into her cardigan pocket, said good night to nobody because nobody was left to say it to, and took the elevator to the lobby. She walked out the main entrance, turned the corner, and positioned herself near the Huron Street exit under the pretense of checking her phone. The wind off the lake was brutal. She stood in it anyway. At 6:42, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. At 6:44, the side door opened from inside, and 2 men in dark suits came out first, scanning the street with the practiced efficiency of people whose job was to see threats before they materialized. And then Stellan Cade walked out. In person, he was more imposing than she had accounted for. She had seen him from a distance, in the elevator lobby, at the far end of conference rooms during all hands meetings she was required to attend, but never required to participate in. Close up, the stillness of him was almost physical. He moved with the economy of a man who had never once in his adult life rushed anywhere, because the world rearranged itself to accommodate his pace. He was pulling on his coat when she stepped forward. One of the security men materialized immediately between them, a hand coming up. "Ma'am, I work in the building," Audrey said, keeping her voice level. "I'm a bookkeeper, 39th floor. I have something for Mr. Cade. It's urgent, and I can't give it to anyone else." The man didn't move. His eyes went to Stellan Cade, and Audrey followed his gaze, and found that Cade was already looking at her, not through her, at her. That alone was almost enough to make her lose her nerve. She was not used to being looked at directly by men like him. "I know who you are," Cade said quietly. His voice was lower than she expected, and unhurried in a way that felt deliberate. "Sims, 39th floor. You do the subsidiary reconciliations," she blinked. "Yes, let her through, Grant." The man stepped aside. Audrey walked the 4 feet separating her from Stellan Cade and held out the folded document. He took it without glancing at it, his eyes still on her face. "You waited outside in 30-degree weather rather than put this through normal channels," he said. "It wasn't a question. Normal channels is the problem," she said. Something shifted in his face. Barely. She was good at barely. He unfolded the paper. She watched his eyes track down the page, then back up, then down again. The wind pulled at his coat. His expression didn't change in any way that would be visible to a camera or a casual observer. But she saw his jaw set, just slightly. She saw the hand holding the paper go very still. He looked up. "How long have you known?" he asked. "About Warren specifically this morning." "The account structure. 18 months. I documented it 3 times. The memos went to Warren." A beat of silence that felt like something fracturing under pressure. "Get in the car," he said. Audrey's heart was hammering. "I have a train to catch." "I know," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You take the red line northbound. You're home by 7:40 on a normal night. This isn't a normal night. Get in the car, Sims. I'll have you home by 9. She got in the car. He was on the phone within 30 seconds of the door closing, speaking in a low, level voice to someone on the other end, while he reread her document. She sat across from him in the dim interior of the SUV and tried to look like someone who got into the vehicles of organized crime figures all the time and found it unremarkable. "Move the Friday transfers to a monitored account," he said into the phone. "Don't flag them. Don't touch them. I want every dollar tracked on the way in, and I want to know every hand it's passed through." A pause. "Yes, tonight." He ended the call and looked at her. "You cross-referenced the subsidiary ledgers," he said. "You're not authorized to see the consolidated structure." "No," she agreed. "You did it anyway." The numbers were anomalous. "I wanted to understand why. And when you understood why, you brought it to me instead of the authorities." She met his eyes. They were dark gray, which she hadn't known until now, and watching her with an attention that felt like it weighed something. "I considered the authorities," she said honestly. "I'm still considering them. I wanted you to know first." Why? She thought about the Christmas envelope. She thought about the burst pipes and the rolled-up sleeves. She thought about how none of that was something she could say out loud to this man without sounding like a fool. "Because it's your money and your company," she said instead. "And you had a right to know before it was gone." He studied her for a long moment. The city moved past the tinted windows. "You're either very brave," he said at last, "or you've spent so long being overlooked in that building that you've stopped being afraid of the people in it." "Both," she said. "Probably." He was quiet for another moment. Then, unexpectedly, "Are you hungry?" She stared at him. "I'm sorry. It's nearly 7. You've been in that building since before 8. I'm going to eat something. You can join me, or I can have Grant drop you at the Red Line." She should have taken the Red Line. Every sensible instinct, she had said, "Take the Red Line." "Fine," she said. The restaurant was nothing like she expected. It wasn't one of the sleek, see-and-be-seen places she'd have guessed for a man like him. It was a small Italian place on a side street in River North, the kind that didn't take walk-in reservations and had handwritten menus and 3 tables in the back, separated from the rest of the room by a wooden partition. The owner came out immediately when Stellan walked in and shook his hand with both of his. They were given the back corner table without discussion. Audrey sat down and looked at the menu and tried to remember how to behave like a normal person. "The pappardelle," Stellan said, without opening his menu. "Unless you're not a pasta person." "I am extremely a pasta person," she said. He told the waiter without asking her again, which should have been presumptuous and somehow wasn't. They ate. He asked her questions, not about the document, not about Warren, but about her actual work, what she looked for, how she identified anomalies in ledger structures. What had first flagged the Cyprus account for her attention? He asked the questions the way someone asks who already understands the answers and is interested in the methodology. Like her knowledge was something worth examining closely. Nobody had ever done that before. Not like this. She answered honestly. She was always more articulate when talking about numbers than about anything else. She stopped worrying about how she looked across the table from a man like him, because the conversation had moved into territory where that didn't seem relevant, and she forgot to remember it. He watched her talk with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize, and eventually filed away to think about later. They were back in the car by 8:45. He had her at the Red Line by 9. "I'll need you to stay in the building tomorrow," he said as she gathered her bag. "Don't approach Warren. Don't change anything in your routine. Can you do that?" "Yes. Don't tell anyone what you heard or what you gave me. I wasn't planning to." He nodded, then quietly. "You took a real risk tonight, Sims. I know. Why?" She had her hand on the door handle. She looked back at him over her shoulder. "I already told you why." "You told me the professional reason," he said. "That wasn't all of it." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she pushed the door open and got out into the cold. "Good night, Mr. Cade," she said, and walked to the station without looking back. She didn't sleep. She lay in her apartment in Andersonville with the lights off, listening to the radiator knock, running through every possible version of tomorrow. In one version, she came in to find Warren gone and everything handled with the quiet, absolute efficiency that Stellan Cade apparently brought to every problem. In another version, Warren had been tipped off, not by Cade but by whoever was on the other end of that side door conversation, and Audrey Sims, 39th floor bookkeeper, became a liability to be managed. She had done the math on the second possibility several times. She was not an idiot. She went in at 8 anyway, because what else was she going to do? The building felt exactly like itself. The lobby security nodded. The elevator opened. The 39th floor was unremarkably normal. Audrey sat at her desk, opened her daily reconciliation files, and spent 6 hours being exactly who she always was. Methodical, thorough, and thoroughly forgettable. At 2:17 in the afternoon, she heard commotion from the floor above. She didn't go to look. She kept her eyes on her screen. 20 minutes later, 2 men she recognized as Meridian's internal legal counsel walked briskly past the 39th floor glass walls toward the elevator, and between them, moving with the careful stiffness of a man who knew the floor had just dropped out from under his feet, was Warren. He didn't look toward the bookkeeping suite. He looked straight ahead. He didn't come back. At 4:30, Audrey's desk phone rang. The display showed an internal extension she didn't recognize. "Sims," she answered out of habit. "Conference room B, 43rd floor." a woman's voice, crisp and neutral. "Mr. Cade would like to see you." Conference Room B on the 43rd floor was nothing like the rooms on her floor. It had floor-to-ceiling windows facing north over the city, a table long enough to seat 20, and exactly 2 people in it, Stellan Cade and a man in a charcoal suit she didn't recognize who said nothing and left within 30 seconds of her arriving. Stellan was standing at the window. He turned when she came in. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly. She sat. He remained standing, which she noticed. He was a man who preferred to look at the whole room rather than be contained inside it. "The account was frozen this morning," he said. "The transfers haven't moved. Warren is being handled. The Cyprus structure is being dismantled, and the funds are being traced." He paused. "It will take time, but the exposure is contained." "Good," Audrey said. 3 people in this building have full visibility on what happened. One of them engineered it. The other 2 are attorneys bound by privilege." He looked at her. "And then there's you. And then there's me," she agreed. "You have 2 options," he said. "The first is a severance package, sufficient to start over somewhere else, signed NDAs, and my personal guarantee that you leave here in good standing with a reference that will open any door you choose." She waited. "The second is that you stay." "Stay," she repeated. "In the same role?" "No." He came away from the window and pulled out the chair across from her, sitting down for the first time. At the same level as her, she noticed, eye to eye. "I've had 3 CFOs in 8 years. Warren is the 3rd person in that seat to compromise this company. I have a problem." He set his hands flat on the table. "I am very good at identifying threats from outside. I am apparently not good at identifying them from inside. You, on the other hand, identified a complex financial conspiracy 18 months before it executed, documented it 3 times, and brought it to me with enough lead time to stop it. Warren buried the memos, which is itself data," he said. "You didn't stop documenting. You built a parallel record without access to the primary systems." She was quiet. "I need someone who thinks the way you think," he said, "who sees what you see. Officially, the role would be Director of Financial Integrity, a new position, reporting directly to me, no intermediary." He named a number. It was 4 times what she currently made. "Unofficially, I need you to watch. Listen, tell me when something is wrong, the way you did yesterday. Tell me who is lying before the lie becomes a disaster." Audrey looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at him. "I'm a bookkeeper from Cleveland," she said. "You're the sharpest observer I've encountered in 20 years of doing business," he said, without any performance around it. Just the flat, unadorned statement of a man who did not bother saying things he didn't mean. The title is just what we put on the organizational chart. She thought about the 39th floor. The fluorescent lights that flickered near the window. The reports she sent upward with her name removed from the header. 11 years of being infrastructure. "I have conditions," she said. Something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. Something that, if she were reading it the way she read everything else, looked like respect. "Name them," he said. She did. They negotiated. He conceded 3 of her 5 points entirely and met her halfway on the other 2, which told her he'd anticipated her terms and had already decided what he was willing to give. She filed that away. She signed the contract 2 days later. The transition was not smooth. It wasn't designed to be. The people who had coexisted comfortably with Audrey Sims, as a piece of 39th floor furniture, did not know what to do with her at the table in the 43rd floor conference room, and several of them were plainly annoyed by her presence. She was not the decorative kind of woman who got promoted in this environment. She was not anyone's idea of a power player. She let them think what they wanted to think. It was the same superpower she'd always had, just operating in a different room. What she found was that the skills transferred perfectly. She watched the way she'd always watched, with the patient peripheral attention of someone who had spent a decade being written off. In November, She sat through a vendor negotiation and noticed the lead consultant checking his phone under the table at specific intervals that corresponded to updates from a competing bid. She told Stellan afterward. He confirmed it within 48 hours. The consultant was on retainer for Meridian's primary rival. In January, at a long dinner with 3 European partners, she noticed one of them was drinking without drinking, bringing the glass to his lips, setting it down, the level never changing. She told Stellan that the man was completely sober, despite performing otherwise, and that the interpreter he'd brought was translating approximately 80% of what was being said. Stellan shifted his entire approach to the negotiation over the following week and walked away with terms 3 points better than his opening position. By March, the capos and senior people had stopped looking at her the way they'd looked at her in the beginning. They didn't treat her warmly. She didn't need warmth. They treated her the way you treat something that has demonstrated it can see you clearly, with a certain careful respect that felt, honestly, like more than she'd had from anyone in 11 years of working in rooms full of people who looked through her. She didn't lose weight. She stopped carrying it like an apology. She bought clothes that fit and were well made, and moved with her, instead of constraining her, because Stellan had assigned her a budget for a professional wardrobe with exactly 0 commentary on what she should do with it, and she'd spent 2 weeks figuring out what she actually liked rather than what disappeared into a wall. It turned out she liked color, deep jewel tones, wine and forest and the specific blue of a late October sky. The moment she understood something had changed between them was not dramatic. There was no single scene she could have pointed to and said, "There." It was an accumulation. It was the way he said her name, Audrey, not Sims, beginning at some point in January she hadn't noted until afterward. It was the way late-night working sessions had acquired a different texture, less transactional and more like conversation, real conversation. The kind where you say things you hadn't planned to say and find afterward that you meant them. It was a night in February when she was reviewing shipping manifests at the long table in his office, and she reached across to point out a discrepancy in the port records, and he caught her hand. Not accidentally, deliberately. His hand over hers on the table. She went very still. "Audrey," he said. Just her name, like that said everything. She looked up at him. He was watching her with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, but with something underneath it she hadn't seen before, or hadn't let herself see. "I know what I look like to people," she said carefully. "I know I'm not. Stop." His voice was quiet but absolute. "I need you to hear me say this clearly." He turned her hand over, his thumb pressing against her palm. "I have been in rooms with some of the most carefully constructed people in this city. I have sat across tables from people who have spent their entire lives curating how they appear to the world." He paused. "You are the most real person I have encountered in longer than I can account for, and you are, without any qualification, the most extraordinary thing in every room you enter. The fact that most of those rooms haven't figured that out yet is their failure, not yours." Audrey stared at him. "You're not great at accepting compliments," he observed. "I'm not great at accepting implausible statements," she said, because honesty was the one reflex she'd never managed to train out of herself. His mouth moved. A real smile this time, and it transformed his face into something she hadn't been prepared for. "Then I'll keep saying it," he said, "until it becomes plausible." She let him. Eventually, she believed him. The annual Meridian Spring Gala was held in the ballroom of the Langham in April, and it was the first year Audrey attended as something other than a person who tracked the catering invoices. Stellan had told her 3 weeks in advance in the same even tone he used to discuss quarterly projections. He expected her there. He would like her there. She had worn midnight blue. Custom fitted because she had a tailor now. A small woman in Wicker Park who understood that plus size didn't mean afterthought, and that fabric was supposed to serve the body inside it, rather than fight it. The dress moved with her. The neckline was deliberate and the fit was precise, and she stood in front of her mirror for a long moment before she left and made herself look at herself the way she'd learned to look at everything else. Without the apologies she'd been taught to layer over what she saw, she walked into that ballroom and the room did the thing rooms do when you've learned how to enter them. It noticed her. She felt it, the pause, the recalibration, the quick assessments conducted by people trained to assess everything. And she understood, for the first time in a specific and embodied way, that she had moved from one category to another. Not because anything about her had changed in the ways she'd once thought change needed to happen, but because she had stopped apologizing for taking up space, and the room didn't know what to do with a woman who wasn't apologizing. Stellan met her at the edge of the room. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for months, which she was still not entirely accustomed to. He took her hand and tucked it into the crook of his arm, with the ease of a man who had decided something and was not open to reconsidering it. A rival consortium principal approached them within minutes, a grey-haired man with the practiced ease of someone who was used to being the most significant person in a conversation. He looked at Stellan, and then at Audrey, doing the quick recalculation she'd seen 100 times in the past months. "Cade," the man said, "and I don't believe we've been introduced." "Audrey Sims," Stellan said, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. "Director of Financial Integrity. She is the reason Meridian Group is standing where it is tonight. And she is the reason," he added, with the same quiet certainty he brought to every statement of fact, "that anyone who intends to sit across a table from me should rethink their approach considerably." The grey-haired man smiled in the way people smile when they have understood that the power in a room does not belong to them. "A pleasure, Miss Sims." Audrey looked at him steadily. "I've read your company's Q4 filing," she said pleasantly. "We should talk sometime." The man's smile flickered, just barely. She felt Stellan's hand press briefly against hers. Later, near the end of the evening, she stood with him at the edge of the terrace overlooking the river. The city lit beneath them, and she thought about the woman who had stood in 30-degree wind on Huron Street with a folded document tucked in her cardigan pocket, trying to remember how to be brave. She was not that woman anymore, or she was. She was entirely that woman. But the woman had stopped being invisible, which turned out not to have been a superpower after all, but a cage she'd built herself, one overlooked room at a time. "What are you thinking?" Stellan asked. He had a glass of scotch. He'd been holding it mostly untouched all evening. "I'm thinking," she said, "that I should have started reading the real numbers a lot earlier." He looked at her. "The books?" "No," she said. "The room." He didn't answer. He looked out at the city with the same expression he'd had at the window the first night, weary and watchful and entirely present. Then he turned and looked at her with the particular quality of attention she had catalogued by now as something she would not find in any other person, something she had stopped trying to explain away. "You were always reading the room," he said. "You were just reading it from the wrong side of the glass." She thought about that for a moment. The city moved below them, indifferent and enormous and full of people who would never know her name. She decided she was done with the wrong side of the glass.